before that, in the 30s, there was a lot of yellow journalism against marijuana because they owned a lot of timber.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so
they,
timber industry, paper industry,
stirred up
synthetic fibers industry.
synthetic fibers, textiles, cotton,
and their lobbyists.
huge competition. And the thing is, it's so easy to grow. It's so easy to grow for farmers and what have you that these big corporations would obviously suffer with a cannabis industry in this country. So that's why we now import a multi-billion-dollar industry, cannabis, from places like Canada. We import it. How many people could we put to work if we had a cannabis industry in this country? How many new businesses for you could start up if we had an industrial cannabis industry in this country? Think about that. So what has happened really is, I talked about a little bit about human rights, and now we're talking about corporate America and the financial end of this. So what has really happened financially? It started out, it began 4 decades ago, and even a little bit before that, where it was mainly the criminals, organized crime, making the bulk of the money under the prohibition of drugs umbrella. But what has happened now is shift. And on the so-called legal side, the corporate side, there's billions of dollars being made. Whether it's the conversation we just had, whether we're talking about drug testing, whether we're talking about certain treatment programs, because I'm a firm believer that under prohibition, we need more treatment. We need more treatment. And I kind of touched on it before, because under prohibition, we actually flood our community with more drugs. You flood your community with more drugs, you're going to have more people addicted, and therefore you're going to have more of a need for treatment. But of course, we don't have the resources for effective treatment because it's in prisons and law enforcement. Yeah. Another issue, and there's so many, we're limited on time, and I want to try to move through as many of these as I can. Mentioned earlier was the militarization of our police. Again, our drug policies. Again, the war on drugs. Surplus military equipment. Why did that find its way into our police department? How did that happen? Well, you see, when I started working undercover back in the 1970s, when we went to serve a search warrant on a home, on someone who was selling drugs, it was my team. It was my squad of 5 or 6 narcs. I don't have shorts on today. You have a shorts on, sandals. Look like you guys, right? Short sandals, long hair, had an afro out to here, We would serve the warrant. And we would have a squad car come along with 2 uniformed people to park out front so they know we're the cops, right? But we would serve the warrant. So what did that do? Number one, we had a relationship with the people that we were about to arrest. Because we've been lying to them for 6 months, a year or whatever, and developed this relationship, and we're going to be the ones knocking on the door and say, hey, Mike, yeah, I'm a cop, police, time to go, right? Very little violence back then. We worked undercover with no guns because I explained to you earlier how we just made the environment more violent with breaking up those organizations. But anyway, so we'd serve the search warrant. We'd knock on the door. There were times, yes, we had to kick the door in because they wouldn't answer the door in time and what have you. But we didn't have, the tanks, and we didn't have the AR-15s and the helmets and suited up and the battering ram. We didn't have all of that. Because what we did prior to serving the warrant is we did our research. If there was no violence, no history of violence, why should we use violence? Okay? We knew how many dogs were in the house. We knew if there were kids in the house. And you know what? We knew exactly what house it was, so we weren't getting the wrong house. Because it was my case, or my partner's case, or somebody else's case. We didn't just give a search warrant to some team to do a dynamic entry, and they end up hitting the wrong house.
That happens so
So
often.
what happened? How did that change? Well, as we move forward, it's directly related to what I explained to you before. As we move into the 1980s, you know, all the hoopla over the crack era, you know, we made it much more than what it really was. And with that, with the violence that we caused by breaking up these organizations, a few organizations making many organizations that took their business to the streets and became violent, now we're like, well, we gotta push back with some violence and protect ourselves. So, you know what? Military's got all this surplus equipment. Federal government was giving us dollars. Now they made a way for us to get surplus military equipment. Yes.
Nobody building up a department is going to turn away free equipment and free, hey, you know.
You don't care. Look,
hey.
You know, cops, we don't turn away free anything.
No donors.
So the equipment, the money, asset forfeiture, and I'm going to touch on that as soon as I finish with this, came into play. And then we got into a habit of, you know what, why don't we just use the SWAT team for every search warrant, no matter what? Because it was easy. It was easy. And we had to justify the equipment. Yeah, I mean, you got this team of people, and you know your armed hostage situations were far and few between. And they're just sitting around, and they're just training, they're just sitting around. So let's use it. So we use it for every search warrant that we serve. I'm going to talk a little bit about asset forfeiture, then I'm going to move into protecting yourselves. I'm going to wrap it up. Okay? Asset forfeiture, big business. Big business. It started out kind of like, you know, since we had prohibition and since we were about the business of locking up people for selling drugs, you know, yes, it sounded as though it's warranted. And, you know, so when you do have these large organizations that are making a lot of money, billions of dollars in selling these drugs, okay, yeah, it would be effective to take away their resources, right? What the equipment and the vehicles and that they're using for the business, as well as the money that they're generating. That was the initial justification, the reason for asset forfeiture. But just like with militarization of our police department, got carried away. Today, if you're driving down the street in Baltimore and there happens to be maybe a half of a blunt on the floor behind your driver's seat that your buddy left in there from partying hard, maybe it could have been in there a week, and you get pulled over and it's discovered, they will take your car, they will take any cash that you have on you, and they'll look for anything else they could possibly do. They can stop you, and they do stop you. And if you have $5,000 on you, and you can't demonstrate to them right then and there where that $5,000 came from, they will take it and make you then justify later as to how you obtain that money legally. A lot of people don't realize that. And there's case after case after case after case, direct violation of the Fifth Amendment, because they can't, the government cannot take your property without due process. But they're taking it. They're taking it.